This is Audible.
Audible Studios presents Buffalo Bayou, a noir crime thriller. Written by Thomas Abrams. Performed by Jason Culp.
Based on the short story Tolerance that first appeared in Houston Noir by Akashic Books, 2019. Chapter 1. Girl in the Water. There was something about the rain in Houston that seemed to leave a film on everything. The more it rained, the slimier it got. And when it rained a lot, like it had this week, the city built on a swamp tended to flood. That storm named Harvey had shown the world what Houstonians had long known. Flooding made the slime break loose, made it impossible to ignore. It was 11:30 on a Thursday night. The bitter aftertaste of citalopram was caught in my teeth like a paste, so I sucked out the remnants with my tongue and licked my lips. I was up to 40 milligrams a day. At least, that's what my hookup told me it was. It didn't seem to make a difference. Nothing did. So I closed my eyes. The drum of thick, cold drops beating rhythmically on the roof of my '95 Chrysler urged me to sleep. I hadn't slept in a while. A knock on the window drew me from the trance. A young woman with short blonde hair and a tan trench coat pressed a badge against the glass. "Hey," she said, "you the new guy?" I cracked the window. "Yeah," I said, "unless there's more than one new guy." She swiped the rain from the window and motioned past the Chrysler with her head. "The body's down there. The sergeant's waiting on us." She backed away from the car, and I shouldered open the door. It creaked and hitched, but opened wide enough for me to climb out and onto the pavement. I slammed it shut with my hip, but didn't lock it. What was the point? The detective offered her hand. "I'm Mim Themis," she said. "Homicide. You can call me Mim." John Druitt. Mim smiled and led me from the parking lot across Allen Parkway to the aluminum statue of a kneeling figure called Tolerance that overlooked Buffalo Bayou. The milky light that glowed at its base cast an eerily judgmental form, so I looked away and trudged closer to the bayou's muddy edge. Mim slowed her pace, digging her heels into the mud for balance. "You were Vice before?" "Yeah, 5 years. Handled sex trafficking. Takes its toll." Mim chuckled. "So you moved to dead people?" My foot slid in the grassy mud, and I skated a couple of feet down the embankment. "Dead people don't feel anything," I said. She shot me a glance with a furrowed brow. Her thin lips curled upward, and her nose crinkled like she smelled something rotten. I'd seen that look before. It came from people who thought they had me figured out. She didn't, even if she thought she did. We descended the slope toward the coffee-colored bayou that snaked through downtown and Buffalo Bayou Park. I used the cuffs of my consignment shop blazer to wipe the droplets from the swell under my eyes. The rain gave the wool blend a sooty odor that lingered in my nose. "According to the sergeant, she was weighted down," Mim said, "but all this rain must have shook her loose. The bayou's up a good couple of feet." I ran my fingers through my hair and shook free the water. "Who found her?" "Jogger." "In this weather?" "Marathon's coming up in a week. People are obsessed." The closer we got to the bank of the bayou, the louder the rush of water. Above us was a split bridge called Rosemont. The steel and concrete spans crossed the water in a V shape and resembled a train trestle more than a pedestrian bridge. Under the bridge, within the confines of flapping yellow tape tied to a bridge piling and 2 young pine trees, was a hive of activity. A drenched rat of a man stood shivering off to one side. He had the narrow frame of a runner and the anxious disinterest of a man detained. Past him, on the sloppy bank of the rising water, was a trio of wetsuit-clad divers. One was bent over, his back heaving as he worked for air. Another was on his knees, next to the woman's body. The third stood watch, as did a half-dozen rubbernecking patrol officers. Dead bodies attracted flies. I stood there for a moment, lost in the rush of the bayou. It was hard not to listen to the gurgle and wash of a swollen bayou, and not wonder, in the muddy parts of my mind, if the water would ever stop rising. I had heard others voice the same fears over bitter coffee and undercooked migas. They huddled close to each other, leaning on the chipped laminate of late-night greasy spoon bar counters, and absently stirred their half and half and whispered about the rain as if it could hear them, while lightning flashed and the feeder roads filled with oily water. "I called the dive team on the way here," said Mim, shaking me from my thoughts. "Gets us a head start." The woman was on her back. Her dark hair covered her face. She was clothed in a torn pink dress that clung to her body in a way that would have been unflattering on a breathing woman. Mim planted her hands on her narrow hips and faced me. "So, I don't know if they told you this when you applied for the posting or when they interviewed you, but in homicide we split the duties. One takes the scene, the other takes witnesses. What do you want?" "Scene." "All right," she said. "I'll talk to the jogger." She slopped over to the thin man. A uniformed sergeant wearing a wrinkled vinyl poncho waved me to the body. Angry raindrops slapped the bayou with growing intensity. I stepped close to the sergeant. "You the new guy?" he asked. I knuckled water from the corners of my eyes and nodded. "New to homicide?" "Crime scene folks are on their way," he said. I thanked him and moved past him to the body. Her stomach was bloated under the dress in a way that made her appear pregnant almost. Her skin was grayish-green, and something had nibbled at her bottom lip and hanging tongue. The skin was loose at her fingers and on her feet. There was the beginning of a scar on her left shoulder, a small, partially healed burn in the shape of an X. There was a 2-foot length of orange rope tied around her right ankle. The rope was knotted at one end, torn and frayed at the other. Her neck was a different color than the rest of her mottled body, varying shades of purple, concentrated in a thick line that ran across her throat. I pulled a wet notepad from my coat pocket, made some rudimentary notes, and pressed myself to my feet. Mim stood behind me. "Not much from the jogger," she said. "We'll have to canvass the apartments across the bayou for witnesses or surveillance cameras." I wiped my nose with the back of my hand and looked at the dim outline of multi-story buildings through the curtain of rain. They stood watch over the bayou. A couple of the windows glowed yellow from the lights inside. Rich people living above the muck, warm and comfortable in their castles. They never flooded. They never waded against the current of rising water, holding their lives above their heads in trash bags. "She's a hooker," I told her. "Probably trafficked." Mim's eyes narrowed. "How do you know?" I pointed to the wound on her shoulder. "That's a brand. There's a group that runs a house off Whitechapel. It's industrial, and they have one of the buildings there. Maybe a block east of the Southwest Freeway. There's a cantina in front, girls in the back. All of them have those marks on their shoulders. We keep busting them, doesn't matter. They find a way. Like the bayous." She rolled her eyes. "Lucky SOB." A sharp breeze swirled around us, whistling against the frame of the bridge and sending a chill from my neck to my lower back. I shivered and pulled the soaked jacket collar against my neck. "How so?" I asked. "You call scene," she said, "and in 5 minutes you've got good information on who she was, who the perp might be, where we go for leads. It's almost like you handpicked it." "Almost." Mim's phone chirped against her hip. She wiped the screen with her thumb and answered the call. While she talked, I stepped back to the body and examined the rope at her foot. The knot was good. It was a bowline, the type of knot that held its shape and didn't shrink or expand. The other end, the frayed end, was ragged. It probably rubbed back and forth against something sharp until it gave way. The killer couldn't have anticipated that. The local weatherman hadn't accounted for 3 days of nonstop rain, the most since 4 feet had fallen in 4 days during Harvey. That storm was the stain you couldn't wipe clean. Mim slid the phone back onto her hip and crouched next to me. CSU pulled up. They'll start snapping pictures, taking videos. They'll do all the measuring. You think we need to expand the scene? I shook my head. Nah, she didn't drown. At least not here. She's got ligature marks on her neck. She was dumped upstream. The killer didn't think she'd break loose. We're not going to find anything here. I agree, Mim said. Good call. Once CSU is finished, they'll call the medical examiner. They'll send a team to finish up here. Then she'll go to the morgue. Then we get out of the rain? She chuckled. Something like that. Hey, she said, thumping me on my arm. Since it's your first case, you get to buy me coffee. Sure, I said. Coffee, beer, Jack, whatever you want. I like you already, Druid. Delete. My favorite key on the computer is delete. It erases my mistakes. There should be a delete key in life, something that helps hide from the rest of the world the things you've done but regret. Something that masks the errors with your real intent. I was holding down the key, racing the cursor back to the left side of the screen, when Mim sidled up to my desk. It was 3:30 in the morning on Friday. She toasted me with her cup of coffee, the styrofoam stained brown at its edges. You're not going to believe this. You need to go to Lake Charles and gamble, brother. Your luck is ridiculous. I'd been to Lake Charles. I'd gambled there. I'd lost. What? I'm almost finished with the We got somebody who knows our girl, she said. Says she saw her Monday night. I thought we weren't heading over to Whitechapel until after we have cause of death, I said. Then going there with a warrant. Don't want to blow our wad needlessly, right? Mim sat on the edge of my desk and drew a sip of the coffee. She was slurping what had to be her 4th cup. We didn't go. She came to us. What's her story? Mim set the coffee cup on my desk. Got picked up in a sweep. Had a scar on her arm. Mentioned Whitechapel to the arresting officer. Buddy of mine downstairs tipped me. I had her moved for a Q&A. I saved my unfinished report and followed Mim to the interview rooms. They were interior rooms on the same floor as our division. Each room had a table, 2 chairs with wheels, 1 chair with no wheels, and a whiteboard. Each room had audio and video recording equipment collected in a monitoring station where others could watch the interrogation. Mim walked with the confidence of a seasoned detective, one hand in her linen pocket. She dressed like a businesswoman more than a cop. Hard to believe she'd been in the rain. She had style, panache, Instagram-worthy, whatever the kids say these days. She led me along the 6th floor corridor to the woman, who waited for us in a small room with gray, foam-covered walls. She rocked back and forth in her chair. One knee bounced. She picked at her cuticles with her teeth. Her stringy brown hair looked wet, even though it probably wasn't. A faded tattoo of Betty Boop above her left shoulder blade. On her arm, there was a thick, X-shaped scar. I stood off to the side next to the whiteboard and let Mim start the conversation. She spun a chair around and straddled it, leaning on the back with her forearms. My name's Mim Themis, she said. This is my partner, John Druitt. I heard your name is Annie. I also heard that you know about a girl who went missing, one of your friends. The woman stopped chewing on her finger, but kept it in her mouth. Her red-tinged eyes danced back and forth between the two of us, seemingly unable to focus on either. Her pupils were dilated. "You high?" I asked. The woman pulled her finger from her mouth and sat on her hands. She curled her lower lip between her teeth and bit down. Mim gave me a disapproving glance. I guess this wasn't how we were supposed to start. She softened her voice and tried to hold the woman's gaze. "You're not going to get in trouble. We really just need your help." "It's spice, isn't it?" I asked. I could spot a synthetic marijuana user like nobody's business. She had jitters, paranoia, and sallow skin color. "You're using right now. I can see it." Mim leaned back from the table and glared at me. She swung her leg over the chair and motioned me into the corner of the room. Her jaw set, eyes wide with anger. She spoke through clenched teeth. "What are you doing? We've got a lead here, and you're intimidating her. You think she's gonna talk if she thinks we're gonna lock her up?" I looked past Mim to the woman. Her fingers raked through her greasy hair, then picked at a small black gauge on her right earlobe. She couldn't sit still. "Good cop, bad cop," I said. Always works. Mim raised an eyebrow. "I'm the good cop?" "Without a doubt. I don't think that's what we're doing here." She shook her head and resumed her one-sided conversation with the woman. She offered useless niceties, promised her some cigarettes or coffee, Shipley's donut, or a hot... "Another hit, Annie. That help?" She glanced at me, checked with a frowning Mim, and looked back at me. She nodded. "No problem," I said. "You just need to help out Mim here. She thinks you might know something about the woman we found in the bayou last night." Annie stared at me, lips pursed. She was stuck in pause mode for a moment, fixated. Then she nodded. Mim pinched the bridge of her nose and squeezed her eyes shut. She sucked in a deep breath of air and exhaled. "Okay," she said begrudgingly. "You tell us what we need to know, and we'll see about getting you some of what you need. Deal?" She nodded, and Mim pulled the phone from her pocket. She unlocked the screen, tapped it a couple of times, and slid it across the table to Annie. Annie glanced at the phone and closed her eyes. Her body sagged in the chair. "Her name was Marianne," she said. Her voice didn't match her appearance. It was timid, almost sweetly apprehensive, the product of a life spent at the behest of others. "She was new." "New to what?" asked Mim. The girl shrugged. "Everything. Drugs, sex." "She was from Connecticut," Annie said. "New London. They brought her last week." "Who?" Annie glanced at me as if I could give her approval, as if I were the one holding sway over her. She bit on her cuticle, nibbling on the loose skin before working it free of her nail bed. I nodded. She looked back at Mim and ran her hand through her hair. She mumbled, "EastEnders." "The gang?" She lowered her head and tugged at the gauge. "They have places where they keep us." "Like Whitechapel?" She nodded. "How would she get out?" Mim asked. "I mean, if they put you in these places, they must keep an eye on you. How did you get out?" She tucked her hair behind her ear. "They keep some tied up, but most of us, they keep us high. You know, they give us stuff for free, so we stay close." "What if you try to run?" Annie's eyes widened with horror. "Nobody does. They'd kill us. I've seen them kill girls. You know, give them too much stuff. OD them on purpose." Mim pressed. "Did Marianne try to run? How'd you know she was missing?" Annie glanced at me and then shook her head. She looked back at Mim, and her eyes widened again. This time it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Her head tilted to one side, and she shook a finger at me. "I think I know you," she said. "I've seen you." Mim swung her attention to me, her face squeezed into a quizzical look. She leaned back and folded her arms. "You know him?" she asked Annie. Annie narrowed her beady little eyes. "It's the hair and the eyes. I know I've seen you. On Whitechapel. You've been in there, drinking at the bar." She had probably seen me. Might have handed me a Jack and Coke or given me more than that. Sex trafficking takes its toll. "Yeah," I said, unfazed by the accusation. "I've been in there. I worked trafficking for 5 years." "Drug trafficking?" Annie asked. "Human." Mim, apparently satisfied with my explanation, shifted in the chair and planted her elbows on the table. "How did you know Marianne was missing?" she asked. "I heard people talking," Annie said. "Nobody's seen her in a couple of days. They dropped her off. She got picked up by some dude in a beater. Never came back." "Did she run away?" Annie shrugged. "I don't really know. We work different spots. I'm Old Spanish Trail. She's 3rd Ward." "You think you could show us where in 3rd Ward she worked?" I asked. "What corners?" Mim nodded her approval. "That'd be great, Annie." Annie scratched Betty Boop above her shoulder. "You think I could get a bump? I'm coming down." "If I get you the bump," I asked, "you'll take me there? The spots where the East Enders drop off the girls?" Annie checked with Mim before nodding. "Sure, as long as nobody sees me in a cop car. I don't want nobody seeing me with no cops." "Not a problem," I said. Mim hopped up from her seat. "Can I talk to you?" She motioned me into the hallway. Annie sat in the room, picking at her cuticles. Mim stood close. She smelled like something earthy, green grass something. It was pleasant, but not overwhelming, subtle. "Couple of things," she said under her breath. "I can't sanction you giving her synthetic pot. I don't know what kind of crap you got away with in Vice, but that's not what we do here. She's already a shaky witness. You give her drugs, and she's toast. The DA will never let her testify." I stepped back. "What's the other thing?" "Why do you need her to show you where the East Enders drop the girls?" she asked. "You know these guys, right? Don't you already know the spots they control?" She was right. I did know. I knew where to find the girls and the boys run by Barrio Azteca, Sereños, Tango Blast, Mara Salvatrucha, Bloods and Crips. I knew their turf, their methods, the legit businesses that fronted their operations, their trafficking routes. And I knew the East Enders were rapidly growing, given the backing of a dominant Mexican cartel. I also knew that no matter how much we learned about all of them, how much actionable intelligence we gained, how many resources or informants we had, we were only scratching the surface. We'd flip on the light, stomp on a cockroach, and 50 more would scramble into the dark corners where we couldn't get them. It had only gotten worse since Harvey. Unlike Katrina, which had drained the Delta of its undesirables and sent them to Houston, Harvey had clogged the city with more homeless than it could handle. Shady contractors had descended on the neighborhoods, piled high with sheetrock, subflooring, and kitchen sinks. Instead of rebuilding homes, they'd spend their cash on women and drugs. The gangs, which we'd gotten better at tracking, had scattered. We'd lost our grip on informants. All of them together floated untethered and just out of our grasp. Some days, just when I thought maybe I was making a dent, I realized it was getting harder to leave a scratch. It got even worse during the pandemic. COVID-19 sent the crime rate skyrocketing. Murders went through the roof, at least 2 a day, maybe more. That was why I got moved to homicide. Too much workload, not enough detectives. I nodded at Themis and shrugged. It changes. Besides, it doesn't hurt to check it out, given we have somebody who knows the area. The East Enders are a focus for us right now. My lieutenant, a good guy, named Segura, you know him? She shook her head. It's a big department. Right, I said. So, Segura wants us to focus on the East Enders. Big initiative. This could help. Maybe there's new intel that could slow them down. Mim inhaled. She planted her tongue in her cheek, rolling it around while she considered it. All right, she said. You head over there with her. I'm gonna drive by Whitechapel. Kill two birds with one stone. We meet back here, and hopefully the ME gives us a positive ID. Then we get a warrant and hit the place. Got it. I'll meet you back here by sunup. They say it's always darkest before the dawn. I've got no clue who they is, but they're right. I'm guessing they've lived a life like mine, always fighting the glare of the light, seeking the shadowy quiet between midnight and the alarm clock. I've never been one for daylight. It offers too much promise. I learned a long time ago that hope is nothing but a sexy woman behind the glass. You stuff your credit card into the slot, the curtains peel back, and she smiles at you. But you're not looking at her face. And there's nothing but the promise of a big bill at the end of the month, with an interest rate you can't afford. It's a nasty cycle, the sun coming up every morning. I'd just as soon it stayed sunken low. It was 5:15 on Friday morning. That was what the clock on my Chrysler said. I couldn't be sure it was accurate. Didn't matter. The clouds had the streets darker than normal. Third Ward didn't get the attention the nicer parts of town got. Powers that be would never let the streetlights go out in Memorial or River Oaks. Hell, if a blade of grass was too long on Inwood Drive, the mayor himself would show up with a pair of scissors. But in the tray, as local rappers called it, a dead body wouldn't catch much glare, let alone a string of busted streetlights. Gentrification or not, Third Ward was still Third Ward. I had my window cranked down, enjoying the musty air and fine mist that had settled over the city. Annie tugged on her seatbelt, trying to get it to click. Your car's old, she said, and I think my belt's broken. I turned onto Elgin and headed southeast. I'll drive slowly, just focus on where we need to be. A shirtless man on a bicycle pedaled past us, riding the wrong way. His wheels were warped, and he had to work the handlebars to keep from tipping over. Turn right up here, she said, near the train. I tapped the brake and swung the wheel to turn onto Scott. We were parallel with the light rail tracks. I started to accelerate, but Annie told me to make a quick right onto Reeves. This is one of the spots. They like us to stay close to the train. I slowed to a stop, flipped the car into park, and listened to the windshield wipers squeak back and forth, barely cleaning the glass of the water that had collected on it. There was nobody here. We were alone. I undid my seatbelt. You sure? This is the spot? Annie shifted in her seat, inching into the space between the seat and the door. She faced me. Yeah, one of them. She was right. This was one of the spots. Reeves and Scott, Delano and Berry Streets, Milby and Tuam. When do I get my hit? She asked. You can have it now, I said. Check the glove box. I've got a couple of packets of potpourri in there. Take whatever you want. Annie's eyes lit up, and she fumbled for the latch at her knee. She plucked it open and leaned toward the opening. Her hands felt around for the drugs, but she pulled them back empty. I rolled up my window. There's nothing there, she said. Sorry, my bad. Check under the seat. Maybe I put them there. Annie reached between her legs, bending forward as far as she could. I turned on the radio. It was a static-riddled AM station playing jazz. Herb Geller, I think. His saxophone cried through the blown speakers. It was like the sax was drowning. Annie started to pull back from her search when I reached across the seat and placed my hand firmly on the back of her neck. She struggled, but my fingers slipped through the greasy tendrils of her mouse-brown hair. I wrapped them tightly and applied pressure, forcing her to stay down, while I used my other hand to manage an orange rope from underneath my seat and around her head. I pulled it tight around her throat and yanked her back toward me where I could watch her. Her eyes bulged, looking at me in a way that told me she either finally recognized me from the last time we'd been together, or she recognized her sad, pathetic life was ending. The pain was almost over. She kicked against the door, reached behind her head to grab at me with her fingers, the fingers she'd spent much of the night chewing. Annie was stronger than I'd figured. Her legs pushed, her arms flailed. There was a determination, a desire to live I didn't expect from a drug-addled hooker forced into the sex trade by bad men who kept her under their violent thumbs. For a split second, I considered letting go, letting her breathe. It crossed my mind